She was standing in my private office with my dead wife's financial records fanned across the desk, like she was already dividing up an estate. My daughter-in-law. The woman my son believed was the love of his life. She heard me come in and froze. And in that half second before either of us spoke, I watched something move through her eyes. Not guilt, exactly. Calculation. She was already deciding what story would work best. I am a retired structural engineer who spent 38 years in this city calculating how much pressure a foundation can absorb before it gives way. I have walked through luxury high-rises and pointed to the exact seam where a collapse would begin. I have seen beautiful buildings fail because no one wanted to say the ugly thing out loud. I knew what I was looking at. I had known for 2 years. I want you to stop for a moment before we go any further. Think about someone in your life right now, someone your family welcomed in, and ask yourself whether that chill in your gut was ever right. Because mine was. And it cost me 2 years of silence, a month of estrangement from my only child, and more sleepless nights than I will ever admit to anyone. I am not telling you this story to congratulate myself. I am telling it because the thing I almost got wrong was the thing that would have hurt my son the most. His name is Dominic. He is 35, a civil engineer with his mother's instinct for beauty and his father's stubbornness about paying his own way. He is the kind of man who will drive 2 hours to help a friend move furniture and then refuse to accept gas money. That is not a flaw. That is a quality so rare it nearly destroyed him, because somewhere out there exists a category of person who looks at genuine generosity and sees only an unlocked door. My late wife, Renata, was a pediatric cardiologist at the Texas Medical Center for 31 years. She spent her career watching parents sit in waiting rooms while strangers fought to keep their children's hearts beating. She had seen the absolute worst of human suffering, and it never made her cruel. It made her precise. When pancreatic cancer took her from us 4 years ago, she left behind 2 things that mattered. A beautifully restored 1920s craftsman home in the Heights neighborhood where we had raised Dominic, and an airtight family trust she had constructed with the obsessive care of someone who had watched financial predators destroy her own grandmother. She knew what people with money too rarely know, that the biggest threat to a legacy is not bad luck. It is someone who loves the idea of what you have built more than they could ever love the people who built it. The first time I met Simone was a Sunday evening in late October. I had cooked a pot of pozole using the recipe Renata had perfected over 15 years of Sunday dinners, and the house smelled the way it always used to smell on weekends. Dominic was 30 minutes late, which was unlike him, and when the door finally opened and he walked in, he had a woman behind him who stepped into my entryway and did something that told me everything I needed to know in under 4 seconds. She didn't look at the family photographs lining the hall. She didn't look at the oil painting Renata had done during her 3rd chemotherapy round, the one that hangs directly at eye level and stops every person who has ever walked through that door. Simone looked at the ceiling. She was calculating the square footage. She looked at the original tile work and was pricing the renovation. She was not walking into a home. She was walking through an inventory. I am not a man who distrusts easily. I built a career on evidence, on observed data, on not condemning a structure until I had walked every floor and examined every load-bearing point. So I told myself I was projecting grief onto a stranger. I shook her hand and said it was good to meet her. At the table, Simone was exactly what I imagined she had rehearsed, being attentive, curious, charming in a way that was just slightly too polished, the way a presentation is polished rather than a conversation. She asked me about my career. She asked about the history of the Heights. And then, in a tone so casual it might have fooled a less observant man, she began asking about the house, whether the property taxes on a historic district home were a burden, whether I found it overwhelming to maintain a property this size without help, whether I still held an active investment portfolio or had moved to something more conservative for retirement. I set my spoon down. Dominic was beaming across the table, completely unaware. He was glowing because the woman he loved was taking an interest in his father. That is what he saw. What I saw was someone running a financial audit at my dinner table, using small talk as a cover story. I want you to sit with that image for a second. Not the dramatic version, not a cartoon villain twirling a metaphorical mustache. Just a charming woman asking reasonable-sounding questions in a warm kitchen while a widowed man decides whether to say something and risk everything, or say nothing and wait. If you were sitting in that chair, what would you have done? Would you have confronted her and watched your son's face fall? Or would you have smiled, poured more wine, and started building a wall where she couldn't see it? I chose the wall. 8 o'clock the next morning, I was sitting across from my estate attorney, Harold, in his office on Westheimer. I was not a paranoid old man. I was a man honoring a promise he had made in a hospital room to a woman with an oxygen tube in her arm. Before Renata died, she had asked me to protect the trust with everything I had. She had described, in precise and loving detail, what had happened to her own grandmother, a widow who had been charmed, married, and financially stripped bare by a man who had understood that loneliness is the easiest door to pick. Renata had structured the trust to hold the Heights Craftsman, the investment portfolio, and the life insurance settlement. Dominic was the sole beneficiary, with no access to the principal until he turned 40. He did not even know the full scope of what existed. Renata had wanted him to build his own life, to know who he was before he inherited who she had been. I told Harold what I had observed. He tightened every document. He found 2 procedural details that could have been exploited and closed them permanently. 6 months later, Dominic announced his engagement. I felt grief and joy simultaneously, which is one of the most disorienting combinations a human being can experience. I hugged my son. I told him I was happy for him, and then I asked Harold to initiate a prenuptial agreement, framed through our legal team as standard administrative procedure for a trust of our size. It did not come from me. It came from paperwork. Simone signed it. Not easily, Dominic later told me she had called it insulting and had accused me, in private, of treating her like a criminal. But she signed it, and the reason she signed it is the thing that stays with me, even now. She signed it because she believed she could get around it. She signed it because she had calculated that once she was legally married, once she had time to work on Dominic, the document would become a technicality she could dismantle from the inside. She was wrong. But she did not know that yet. The wedding was held at a boutique hotel in Midtown, a beautiful, expensive production that emptied Dominic's personal savings and which I attended with a smile permanently fixed to my face. Simone's dress reportedly cost as much as a used car. The centerpieces were imported flowers. I watched her scan the room during the reception, her eyes moving across guests the way a jeweler's loupe moves across stones, assessing, sorting, cataloging. I watched my son dance with her, and he looked happier than I had ever seen him, and I felt a cold, specific sorrow that I could not explain to anyone. Because I had no proof yet, only pattern recognition, and pattern recognition without evidence is just prejudice dressed up as instinct. They moved into Dominic's 2-bedroom condo in Midtown, a property he had paid off on his own. Within 5 months, Simone began her work. It wasn't loud, it was atmospheric. She made the condo feel wrong, too small, too loud, too close to the freeway. She would say things like, "I just want space for us to grow." She would fall quiet in ways that made Dominic feel responsible for her unhappiness. She was not demanding a new home. She was making him feel guilty for the one he had. Dominic came to my kitchen table and asked me for $100,000. He looked exhausted and ashamed, and he framed the request as an investment in their future. I said no. Quietly and without making him feel small, I said no. I honestly do not know if that was the right call in the moment. I lost sleep over it. I knew it would push him toward her and away from me. I knew he would feel judged, and I knew that if I said yes, I was funding the very siege that was being conducted against us. There is no clean option when a parasite is embedded in someone you love. Every choice has a cost. Simone shifted strategies. The week after I refused the loan, Dominic came to the house looking hollow, like someone had quietly taken something from behind his eyes. He stood at my kitchen counter and told me that Simone thought it might make practical sense to move in with me, to help me age, to make use of the extra space. I felt something cold spread through my chest. To make use of the extra space, the house where Renata had died, the house where Dominic had grown up, the house with the locked study and the fireproof cabinet and the trust documents and the letter I had been keeping for the right moment. I told Dominic that I valued my privacy and that it wasn't something I was willing to change. He looked at me with a particular pain, the pain of a man caught between 2 people he loves, desperate for both of them to bend so he doesn't have to choose. Then he said something that landed like a stone in still water. "She says you've never given her a real chance, Dad. She says you decided to hate her before you even knew her." He left. We didn't speak for 6 weeks. I want to be honest with you about those 6 weeks. I am not a man who lets silence stretch by choice. I called his number twice and didn't leave messages. I drove past his building once just to see if the lights were on. I am telling you this because I think people imagine that doing the right thing feels like doing the right thing. It doesn't always. Sometimes it feels like abandonment, like failure, like watching someone you raised walk toward a cliff while you calculate whether your warning will make things worse. During those months, Simone escalated. She quit her corporate logistics position, announcing to Dominic that she was launching an independent supply chain consulting firm. He was supportive in the way only someone with a genuinely generous heart can be, completely, without conditions, at enormous personal cost. He paid all their joint expenses. He covered her luxury car lease and her gym membership and her co-working space fees. He worked 55, 60 hours a week. I watched the timeline on my end as Harold gave me updates and nothing materialized. No LLC filing with the state, no registered business name, no clients, no revenue. 19 months passed. She was sitting in upscale coffee shops with a laptop and a $7 latte, building an empire that existed only as a talking point. And her attention on my estate grew more intense with every month that passed. She asked Dominic whether I had updated my living will. She offered to oversee a kitchen renovation at the Craftsman, positioning herself as the project manager. She was trying to plant herself inside a house she had not been invited to inherit. Everything broke open on a Wednesday in February. I had a cardiology appointment at Methodist Hospital, a routine check, nothing alarming, scheduled for 3 hours. Dominic was on a job site in the energy corridor. The Craftsman was supposed to be empty. The appointment ended after 40 minutes. My cardiologist had a family emergency. The nurse rescheduled and sent me home. I took a cab back to the Heights. I unlocked the front door. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that isn't peaceful, the kind that has something inside it. I hung my coat and noticed, at the far end of the hall, a thin blade of light on the floor. It was coming from beneath the door of my study. That room is always locked. Always. I walked down the hallway slowly, and I want you to understand what that walk felt like. Not dramatic, not like a movie, but like every fear I had carried quietly for 2 years was suddenly standing at the end of a corridor, waiting to be confirmed. My heart was loud in my ears. My hands were steady. I have been in buildings I knew were structurally compromised and kept walking because the work required it. This was the same. I pushed open the door. Simone was standing at my open fireproof cabinet. Renata's manila folders, bank records, property deeds, trust summaries, tax filings were spread across my desk. She looked up when the door swung open. The color left her face completely. Neither of us spoke. I want to try to describe that silence to you, because it was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of confirmation. Every pattern I had observed for 2 years, every dismissed instinct, every sleepless night, it was all in that room, materialized, undeniable, and she knew that I knew. And she was watching me very carefully to see what I would do. Honestly, if I'm being fully transparent with you, I don't know how I stayed as calm as I did. I think it was Renata. I think it was the specific knowledge that the woman who had designed that cabinet's contents had anticipated this exact moment and had made sure it would be okay. I was not walking into a trap. I was standing at the conclusion of a plan that had been set in motion by someone far more perceptive than either of us. Simone recovered quickly. She is, I'll give her that, a skilled performer. She smiled with practiced warmth and told me Dominic had asked her to stop by and pick something up. She said she noticed the study door had been left open. She said she was just looking for a pen. I walked across the room. I collected the folders from the desk. I looked at her steadily and pointed at the door. "You need to leave," I said. She left. I sat in my leather chair for 3 hours. I looked at Renata's photograph on the desk, a picture from maybe 15 years ago, before the diagnosis, taken on a beach in the Yucatan where she's laughing at something off camera. I thought about how she would have handled this moment. Probably with more grace than I could manage. Possibly with a specific kind of ferocity I had always loved in her. I picked up my phone. I did not call Dominic. I called Harold. The next morning at 9, I drove to Dominic's condo in Midtown. He buzzed me up without a word. When I stepped inside, the apartment felt like the inside of a held breath. Dominic was standing at the kitchen counter, gripping a coffee mug so hard I could see the tendons in his forearm. He looked like a man who had not slept and knew exactly why. Simone was on the couch across the room, arms folded, her expression composed into something between wounded innocence and barely controlled contempt. She had spent the night working on him. I could feel it. I sat down in the armchair and kept my coat on. I looked at Simone. "You went through my private records," I said. My voice was quiet. I have learned over a lifetime that quiet carries further than loud, in the same way a hairline crack carries further than a visible break. Simone lifted her chin. "I was being practical," she said. "You are 71 years old, Thomas. Dominic is your only family. We have a right to understand the estate we're going to inherit. You're keeping financial information from your own son, and I think that's controlling and cruel." I turned to Dominic. "Did you send her to my study?" He looked at the floor. "No," he said. "No, Dad. I didn't." Something moved through Simone's face, then a flash of genuine anger that she immediately smoothed back into performance. "Dominic," she said, and her voice shifted register. Softer, more desperate. "I saw the trust documents. I saw how it's structured, He has built a legal fortress to keep us out permanently. Even as his wife, even as the future mother of his children, I am entitled to nothing. He has never respected this marriage. He has been waiting for me to fail since the first day I walked through his door. She was not entirely wrong about that last part, and I respected the accuracy of it enough to address it directly. The trust was established by Dominic's mother 13 years ago, I said. She built it because she watched a predatory man dismantle her own grandmother's security after her death. It holds the craftsman, the investment portfolio, and the life insurance settlement. It is worth approximately $2.8 million. I paused. And you are correct that you will never access a cent of it. The prenuptial agreement you signed ensures that. The trust structure ensures it further. Renata made it bulletproof precisely because she understood that not every person who enters a family comes to build something. The number landed in the room the way large numbers do, not as information but as a physical weight. 2.8 million. I watched Simone's eyes and saw the mental arithmetic running behind them, saw the recalibration, saw the moment she understood the full dimension of what she had been locked out of. And then I watched the performance dissolve entirely. She stood up, her voice climbed. She called me paranoid. She called me abusive. She said I had spent 2 years trying to undermine her marriage because I didn't want my son to grow up and stop needing me. She said she had abandoned her career and her independence to build a life with this family, and that I had repaid her sacrifice with cruelty and suspicion. She was shaking, and the shaking was real. It just wasn't coming from grief. It was coming from rage. And I understood her. In that moment. I want to say that clearly. I understood what it felt like to believe you were owed something and to have a locked door tell you otherwise. I understood the specific fury of someone who had made a plan and watched it dissolve. I did not pity her, but I understood her, and I think that distinction matters. I waited until she finished. You have not worked in 19 months, I said. You told Dominic you were building a consulting business. Last week I hired a licensed private investigator to review your business records. Your LLC does not exist. You have no state registration in Texas. You have no website, no client contracts, no invoiced work, no business bank account. There is no company. There has never been a company. You have been spending my son's income while representing yourself as an entrepreneur, and the only evidence of professional activity you have ever produced is a single $900 deposit that the bank confirmed was a store return from a luxury purchase made on Dominic's card. The room went absolutely still. Dominic was looking at the counter. His jaw was working like he was trying to find words in an empty room. Simone turned to him and her voice broke not in sorrow, but in something sharper and more desperate. Dominic, please. He is trying to destroy us. He has never wanted this marriage to work. We can get counseling. We can work through this. Please don't let him do this. Dominic set his coffee mug down on the granite counter. The sound was quiet and final. Dad, he said, I want to see the trust documents. Take me to the house. Simone moved toward the door. She put herself physically between Dominic and the exit, not dramatically, but definitely. Please, she said, please don't do this right now. He looked at her for a long moment. The man I watched in that moment was not the same man who had beamed across my dinner table 2 years earlier. Something had reorganized behind his eyes. My mother left something for me, he said quietly. I need to go read it. We drove to the Heights through a gray February morning, the city flat and pale around us. Neither of us talked. I have never been a man who fills silence uncomfortably, and Dominic has always been the same way, something he got from Renata. We parked and walked up the front steps, and I unlocked the door, and the house smelled like old wood and the particular stillness of a space that has been respected. I led him to the study. I typed the code March 3rd, Renata's birthday, and the deadbolt turned. The room smelled like cedar and thyme. I went to the fireproof cabinet and pulled out the trust documents, but I set them aside for a moment. I reached to the very back of the bottom drawer and found what I had been keeping for exactly this day, a sealed envelope, slightly yellowed, with Renata's handwriting across the front in the blue ink she always used. For Dominic, when the time comes and you need to hear my voice. I handed it to my son. She wrote this 3 weeks before she died, I told him. She made me swear not to give it to you until you genuinely needed it. I held on to it longer than I should have because I kept hoping you wouldn't. I stopped. I'm sorry it took this. Dominic sat down in my leather desk chair and held the envelope in both hands, the way you hold something irreplaceable. He broke the seal carefully, unfolded the pages, and began to read. I turned to the window. Outside, the old live oak in the front yard was bare and enormous, its branches holding the gray sky up. I knew what the letter said. I had read it 4 times in the years since Renata had pressed it into my hands. She wrote about her grandmother. about watching her lose her home and her dignity to a man who had targeted her loneliness. She wrote about Dominic's heart, how it was the part of him she was most proud of and most frightened for, because a heart that open, without structure around it, is not freedom, it is exposure. She told him that the people who love you most will sometimes disappoint you and still be right. She told him to pay attention not to how people treat him when there's something to gain, but to how they treat the people who have nothing to offer them. She told him that real love does not keep a running total. And then the final paragraph, which Dominic read out loud in a voice that was nearly gone. The world contains people who are incapable of genuine love not because they are evil, but because they learned early that survival requires calculation. They will look at your goodness and see a resource. They will look at your loyalty and see leverage. You will know them because when they look at your home, they will be measuring the walls. When they look at your past, they will be auditing your assets. And when you finally see it clearly, and I know you will, eventually, my love, I need you to know that it was never your fault for being good. It was never a flaw. It was your greatest gift. Guard it better than I taught you to. Dominic lowered the pages to his lap. A single tear tracked down his face and fell onto the paper. She knew, he said. She wasn't a prophet, I told him, turning from the window. She was a cardiologist who spent 30 years watching people try to protect the most vital thing they had. She understood how damage happens. We stayed in that room for a long time. I watched my son do the slow, terrible work of recontextualizing a marriage, seeing it from outside for the first time, running back through 2 years of moments and understanding them differently. The way Simone had quietly separated him from his closest friends, dismissing them as insufficiently ambitious. The way she had made his financial success feel inadequate rather than admirable. The way she had only ever been her warmest self when they were around people with money. It was not a marriage. It was a long-term extraction project. What do I do? He finally asked. You do exactly what your mother planned for, I said. The conversation that happened back at the Midtown condo 2 days later was not dramatic. I want to be specific about that, because I think people expect confrontations like this to involve screaming, broken things, operatic collapse. This one was quiet and surgical. Dominic sat at his dining table with his laptop open and 24 months of joint bank statements on the screen. I sat across from him. Simone was at the end of the table, watching. He turned the laptop toward her. $114,000, he said. That's what I deposited into our joint account since the wedding. That number includes your car, your gym, your co-working space, your travel, your clothing, and the expenses from your consulting business that does not exist. He paused. Do you know what your total financial contribution to this household has been? Simone said nothing. $900, Dominic said. One deposit, which the bank confirmed was a merchandise return from a bag you bought on my credit card. Something changed in Simone's posture. The performance ended. What replaced it was something rawer and, in its own way, more honest. Pure entitlement. Unmasked. You are my husband, she said, her voice flat and cold. You are legally obligated to maintain a certain standard of living for me. I gave up my career trajectory to be part of this family. I rearranged my entire life around a future that your father spent 2 years trying to destroy. If you think I'm going to apologize for expecting what I was promised, I promised you a partner, Dominic said. You were looking for a portfolio. He closed the laptop. This condo is titled solely in my name, purchased before the marriage, he said. My attorney has already drafted the eviction notice. You have 48 hours. If you contest the divorce, we will submit the investigator's report and file charges of financial misrepresentation. The prenuptial agreement leaves you nothing from the trust or the estate. He looked at her steadily. I am not angry with you, Simone. I just finally see you clearly. She looked at me. Her jaw was set. You planned this from the beginning, she said. I prepared for it, I said. That's different. She packed her things and was gone before the 48 hours elapsed. The divorce took 4 months. Her attorney reviewed the prenuptial structure, the trust protections, and the investigator's report, and told her that litigation would cost more than she could possibly win. She requested alimony. The judge dismissed the petition within a week of reviewing the financial documentation. She walked away with what she had brought in. Nothing. This is the part of the story where I'm supposed to deliver the lesson cleanly, the way lessons arrive in movies compressed and obvious and satisfying, but the truth is more uneven than that. Because the lesson I took away was not triumph. It was something closer to grief for the years. My son and I moved carefully around each other, both of us protecting something the other couldn't fully see. What I learned was this. Kindness and legal structure are not opposites. Renata understood that intuitively, You can love someone completely and still build walls around what matters. You can trust someone absolutely and still have a prenuptial agreement. Offense is not an insult. It is evidence that you care enough about something to protect it. The mistake most people make is believing that love alone is sufficient protection. It isn't. It never has been. Love is the reason you protect something. It is not the mechanism of protection. I want to ask you something directly, right now, wherever you are watching this. Look at the people around you, the ones you share finances with, the ones who know your passwords and your account numbers and the rough outline of your net worth. Are any of them here for the specific version of you that exists without resources? Would they still be building something alongside you if the money were gone? That question is not cynicism. It is the most loving question you can ask. 2 years have passed since the February morning when everything broke open. The Heights craftsman feels different now, lighter somehow, like a house that has remembered what it was built for. Last Sunday, Dominic came for dinner. I was at the stove making Renata's red pozole from the recipe box she kept in the left-hand drawer, the one with her handwriting on the dividers, and I heard the front door open, and heard my son's voice, and heard, behind it, a woman's laugh, the real kind. The kind that comes from somewhere low and genuine, not from performance. Her name is Priya. She is 33 years old. She is a pediatric nurse at Texas Children's Hospital, which I choose to believe Renata would have found satisfying on a level beyond coincidence. She drives a 15-year-old Honda with a cracked rear bumper and a parking permit from the medical center. The first time she walked into this house, she stopped in the entryway for a long moment and looked at the oil painting Renata had done during her 3rd round of chemo. She looked at it for nearly a full minute. Then she turned to me and asked, "She was a painter too?" That was it. That was all I needed to know. I watched Dominic and Priya set the dinner table together, bumping shoulders, laughing quietly at something private, not performing anything for anyone in the room. It looked like two people choosing each other in the ordinary moments, which is the only place choice means anything. After dinner, Priya insisted on washing the dishes alone. She waved us both away and turned on the little radio on the kitchen counter and started singing under her breath. Dominic and I went out to the back porch. The February air was mild the way it gets in Houston in late winter, soft and full of jasmine from the neighbor's fence. I found a bottle of wine in the cabinet below the grill, a Rioja that Renata had set aside years ago, labeled in her handwriting, for something worth celebrating. I opened it. Dominic took his glass and looked out at the yard for a long time without speaking. "Dad," he finally said. "Yeah. Thank you for keeping that study locked." I looked at the old live oak at the back of the yard, the one that has been there longer than the house. "I didn't save you," I told him. "Your mother did. I just held on to what she left you until you were ready for it." He nodded slowly. He lifted his glass. We didn't say anything else for a while, and the silence felt like the right kind, the kind that has something whole inside it. The study is still locked. The code is still March 3rd. But it is no longer a vault against danger. It is just a room full of her handwriting, her photographs, her files, her voice on paper, everything she understood about the world. Everything she left us to navigate it with. The foundation held. Now I want to hear from you, because I think about these stories long after I've finished telling them. Drop a number in the comments right now. Leave a 1 if you believe I was right to handle this quietly and legally rather than confronting her directly from the start. Leave a 2 if you think I overstepped that investigating my daughter-in-law crossed a line regardless of what she was doing. Leave a 3 if you think Dominic bears some responsibility for the warning signs he chose not to see. I don't think any of these answers is wrong. I think they each tell me something important about who's watching. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read more of these comments than you'd believe, and there is something genuinely moving to me about hearing from people in cities I've never been, at hours I've never kept, wrestling with the same things we wrestle with here. And if you have ever been in a relationship where someone was calculating your worth instead of building alongside you, if you have ever caught someone measuring your walls, please share your story below. Not to be seen, but because someone reading these comments right now is 3 months from the moment where they'll finally need the permission to trust what they already know. If this story sat with you, hit subscribe. I'll keep telling them. The real ones, the hard ones, the ones that don't resolve neatly but resolve honestly. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Houston, Texas to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.